The Fireside Tales is a place that is shrouded in mystery and legend, a place where it seems that anything is possible. Throughout the course of these tales, I've done my best to delight you, to surprise you, to make you cry, and even to make you afraid. And I hope I've succeeded in these end of hours, but now we've come to the final hour, and I will be telling you all tonight the last tale of the Fireside Tales, technically. Although I might bring the stories back from time to time just for fun. But thinking about which story I should tell you all, I decided upon a story about the Kingdom of Light, and it's the very beginning of our organization, the Fireside Tales. The story starts in the Age of Darkness, a world that was covered with darkness, and all the beasts of hell were running across the earth. The Great Nightmare, of course, as I've told you about before, the spirits, the imps, and the demons, and all the creatures that were coming out of the crack of hell, and the tribes of mankind were all scattered, and very little was left of humanity. But there was one place where light still shone in this world, and it was known as the Kingdom of Light, and the people here lived almost with God. Indeed, actually, sometimes the angels would descend down in the city and talk to the people one-on-one. And the people here were very wise, and they were all very good. They were a holy city. But anyways, the ruler of the city was known as King Aldric, who was about, at the time of this story, 145 years old, and he had 7 daughters, and he had a brother who was a great scientist by the name of Horus. And anyways, for a long time they lived in peace, and they didn't fear the darkness. But then one day they began to realize that the oils for their lamp were beginning to run out, and soon enough the city would be in darkness just like everything else. And the people were all very much afraid, and some denied that the darkness would ever come. They said that something would occur and that the angels would come down from the heavens and help them. But when no one was arriving and the oil was getting lower and lower, people began to realize that their fate might be sealed, that they were indeed going to be swallowed up by darkness. So the people began to pray. And all this time, the great monsters and the beasts were causing storms in the city, and it was a terrible time for them all. Great windstorms would come in, and there would be earthquakes. And so the people wanted a savior, but for the longest time, no savior came, and it seemed like God wouldn't help them. But as we've learned here in the Fireside Tales, sometimes heroes come when you least expect them, and this seems to be the case in this tale. For, coming down through the hills, there came this world's hero, and the most unlikely of hero he was. Now, the man was by the name of Claude, as our text seemed to indicate, and he was a very odd-looking man, to be sure. I wouldn't necessarily call him handsome, but he had this long hair up the side of his head that sticked out like loaves of bread, and he had these, like, wild, eccentric eyes that seemed to spark with electricity. And he wore all this shirt that was covered in all sorts of different collars, and he had these big, bright yellow shoes, as big as clown shoes. And anyways, he was pushing along with him a wagon that was covered with lights and spell books and, of course, all the things he needed to survive out there in the wilderness. And soon enough he came towards the city, and he saw the city, and he wondered to himself what it was, for never had he saw something so beautiful. And as he came towards the gate, the soldiers all looked down, and they could see him down there. Now, I must say that this gate was huge. I mean, bigger than any wall that we human beings have created in our age. It had to be in order to keep out the monsters. Anyways, that actually isn't exactly true. There are a few walls that humanity today has created that were larger than this one, but it was still very large for its time. And the soldier shouted down, "Who are you? What are you, some sort of demon or ghost?" And the man said, "Oh no, my name is Claude. Please let me into the city, for I've never seen something so very beautiful." The soldiers all began to talk to themselves, wondering what this could be. And, you know, they had to be careful during this time. But finally they decided something so small couldn't possibly be any harm to them, so they sent word to the king, King Aldric, and eventually the doors of the gate were opened, and Claude walked in. Now, you have to understand there were no visitors to the Kingdom of Light, not for the very least hundreds of years, and except for the angels, very few creatures ever came down. But anyways, all the people came out into the city and watched this man as he went down the road with his wagon covered in lights. And Claude looked around at them, and he just sort of looked with amazement. Now, again, he was a rather eccentric fellow. Anyways, he continued going down the trail, and the little girls and boys watched him, and they felt rather afraid of him, but were also amazed. It was sort of like they were looking at the sun for the first time. They knew it hurt their eyes, but they still wanted to look at it, see all of its wonders. And eventually, Claude arrived in the center of the city, where King Aldric's statue stood, and King Aldric himself came out with his cane, and he looked over at Claude, and his 12 wise men came out too, alongside the king, as well as the king's 7 daughters. And King Aldric, he watched as the man approached, and he stopped in the middle of the square, and the king said, "Who are you? Are you a friend of this city of light, or are you an enemy?" And Claude said, "Well, I am here with goodwill. I'm a wanderer. I come to delight people. You see, I've been traveling across this world, visiting people in the darkness." And anyways, the King Aldric, he didn't know what to make of Claude, but finally he said, "My dear sir, we here at the city have been praying for about a year now for someone to come and save us from the darkness, to bring us an eternal light. Might you be that hero?" "Well," said Claude, and he didn't know what to think, but he said, "Well, I very well might be. What is it you said you needed?" "An eternal light," said King Aldric. Yes, I absolutely know of an eternal light. I know of a source of light that will never run out," said Claude. "Then you are our hero, then," said King Aldric, "and you are welcome into our city. Come, get him to the dining table. We'll have entertainers for him, and he shall be honored here as our guest." And anyways, the people all begin to bring Claude into the palace, and Claude enjoyed himself very much. He had never seen anything like this in his entire life. He'd been born into a barbarous world of savages, and here at the City of Light he felt almost as if he'd walked into a dream, and he started to wonder whether he wasn't imagining all this. People came out and sang him songs, and acrobats did tricks for him, and fire eaters came up to him and played their tricks as well, and all the time Claude noticed the most beautiful thing he'd ever saw, a woman by the name of Ari, and she was sitting over, and she was one of the king's daughters. Now, Claude had never really fallen in love before, but at that moment he was deeply in love with Ari, and he resolved to meet with her and speak to her soon. And the king was very glad to have them there, and he said that this man had to be their hero, for what else could he be? No one had ever arrived in the city before. But one of the people there wasn't impressed, one of the king's wise men, Horace. And Horace looked over at Claude, and as the people were eating, finally he said, "My king, I would like to state here and now that I have misgivings about this man. I have heard that there are savages out there in the darkness, and I believe that this man is one of them. He has come here to trick us, and he wants us to give him our money and our armies, and for what? A fake source of energy that can last forever? Me and my scientists have been testing and trying to come up with a way to create light, and we have a reason to believe that energy could not possibly stay like this forever, not for all time. I believe that this man Claude here is lying, as there is no possible way he can deliver on the promise he is giving us." Well, anyways, King Aldric looked at the scientist, and he felt rather offended because he didn't want his brother saying all of this stuff. I mean, after all, this was their hero, and the people were finally having hope for the first time. And Claude stood up and said, "Well, how dare you? You don't even know me." "Well, I assure you that Claude Winkle never tells a lie. I do indeed have a source of light that can last forever, and I will have an entire army come with me out into the lands of darkness and bring it all back for you, and you will see who's telling the truth or not. Go with your science, but there are some things in this universe that can't so easily be explained." And anyways, Claude sat down, and the scientist Horace got up and said, they were all fools for listening to a man like this, someone they didn't even know, who wasn't even a part of their family. And he walked out of the palace and out of the dining room. And anyways, the king said for him not to mind, and that his brother always had attitudes like these, and that no one really liked his brother anyways. But anyways, afterwards, Claude asked Ari to meet him by the fountain in the middle of the city. So anyways, Ari did as she was told, and Claude said, "My dear, I do not think I have ever seen a flower so beautiful as you. In all my wandering, I have never felt this way in my heart." And Ari looked at him and said, "Oh, my dear sir, I must confess that there is something that I feel for you as well. I knew it the moment that I saw you. I am not sure if there is such a thing as love at first sight, but I do believe that if such a thing existed, it would have occurred now, at this moment. Perhaps it is destiny, perhaps it is fate, but I would like your and my souls to be intertwined with each other for all of eternity." "I feel the same way," said Claude, "and that is why I would like to ask your hand in marriage." And Ari, she put her head down and said, "Very well, I shall." "Yes," said Claude, "and we will get married just as soon as I bring back the eternal light from the darkness." So it was agreed upon, and the king was very happy that his daughter was going to marry the savior of the entire city. So eventually Claude got together an entire army, and Horace was against the whole thing, feeling sure that Claude was a liar. But anyways, Claude left the city, and all the people sat around and they waited for Claude to make his return. But the months went by, and Claude did not return. And again, the light and the oil was really beginning to dwindle, and the people were realizing that they did not have long before the monsters would come and take control of the city. So anyways, the king began to realize that their prayers had gone unanswered, and he lost all hope. Ari was the only one in the entire city who still believed that Claude might come back someday, although Horace seemed to be going around telling everyone that, to say a common phrase, "I told you so." But anyways, it did indeed seem that the darkness was going to take control. But then, one day, something incredible happened. The guards were looking out from the wall, and they saw a giant source of light approaching the city. And soon enough they realized it was Claude and the whole entire army. And up above in the air there was this giant net, and it was filled with millions of fireflies. And Claude said, "Open the gates, open the gates." So the doors of the gate was opened, and it was easy enough to get the fireflies inside. And King Aldric met Claude and said, You have brought us the eternal light source. We are ever thankful to you." And Claude said, "Yes, and you all thought I was a liar, didn't you? But we had a little bit of a skirmish with some giant spiders, but we're all right now." Anyways, as Claude was speaking, suddenly something very much unexpected happened. You remember I was telling you about those great winds that occurred in the city? It came from this giant sleeping dragon, a big black one, and occasionally he would wake up and he would let out a loud breath, and it would hit the city of light. And this indeed was what happened. A great wind stirred up, and suddenly all the army began to panic and not know what to do, and Claude said, just relax, everything will be fine." But the net of fireflies was beginning to be pushed over, and suddenly they began to lose control, and all the rest of the army began to panic and run away, except for Claude, who held on to the ropes. "Hold on a second," he said, and he began to fly up in the air. "Oh, dear me," said Claude, and everyone watched in terror, and Ari let out a yell as Claude went up into the sky. He floated around with the firefly nets and him holding on to it for dear life. And as he flew around, he realized that he didn't stand a chance. If he let go now, he would fall to his death. Well, anyways, the bag flew, and it flew up into the air, until finally the force of the wind broke the net apart, and all the fireflies came out of the net, and Claude began to fall down into the darkness. Well, anyways, all the fireflies began to sprinkle around in the sky until they formed the stars, which we know of today. Now, no one knows what happened to Claude, and after the wind stopped, everyone went out and searched for him, but they were unable to find him. Some believe that he died out there in the darkness. It would seem likely that he just fell to his death. Others say that maybe an angel flew down and saved him from his demise, or maybe Claude was just smart enough to have a parachute. I don't really know. But anyways, Aerie promised that she would wait for Claude in the City of Light for all time. And so all the people realized that Claude had indeed been a hero, and that he had given this city light when it seemed that no light could be found. And even the scientist Horace would often look up at the statue of Claude in the middle of the city and say what a great man he was, and say a prayer to him, their new saint. And so that is my tale. A tale about when sometimes when you reach even the darkest of place, always there can be a light to be found. And, as always, sweet dreams and good night.